A year was 1842, and Mary Thompson was going to die. She knew this with the certainty that only a 9-year-old living on London's East End streets could know. Winter had arrived early, vicious and unforgiving, and Mary had nowhere to sleep, nothing to eat, and exactly 3 matches left to sell. 3 matches. That a halfpenny each. That was the difference between eating tonight and not eating at all. Her mother had died of cholera 6 months earlier. Her father, a dock worker, had been crushed between cargo ships 3 months before that. Mary had no family, no home, and no prospects beyond the wooden box of matches she carried through the freezing streets, calling out in a voice made hoarse by cold. Matches, fine matches, light your way home. But nobody was buying. Not from a barefoot child whose dress was so threadbare it barely qualified as clothing. Not when they could buy from adult vendors who didn't remind them of their own mortality. By nightfall, Mary huddled in a doorway near Covent Garden, the 3 matches clutched in her frozen fingers. She could light one for warmth, just one. But that would mean one less to sell tomorrow, and tomorrow she'd be even hungrier than today. As she sat there, shivering and weighing which death seemed worse, freezing or starving, a well-dressed gentleman stumbled out of a tavern nearby. He was clearly drunk, laughing too loudly, his expensive coat unbuttoned despite the cold. As he passed Mary's doorway, something fell from his pocket. A leather purse, fat with coins, landed directly at her feet. Mary's hand shot out, grabbing it before thought could catch up with instinct. The gentleman stumbled on, oblivious. She had perhaps 30 seconds before he'd notice and turn back. 30 seconds to make a choice that would define everything that followed. The purse felt heavy. Heavy meant money. Money meant food, meant shelter, meant survival. Mary could disappear into London's vast underworld with these coins and live for months. No one would ever know. The drunk gentleman probably wouldn't even remember losing it. But Mary's mother, in the last coherent words she'd spoken before the cholera took her mind, had whispered, "We're poor, Mary, but we're not thieves. The poor have only one thing the rich can't buy: honor. Don't sell yours cheap." Mary stood on frozen feet and ran after the gentleman. Sir, you dropped this." He turned, confused, then saw the purse in her grimy hands. For a moment, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. The assumption that she'd stolen it, that calling the constable would be appropriate. Then he looked closer at her face, saw something there that made him pause. "You could have kept it," he said quietly, suddenly sober despite the gin on his breath. "Yes, sir." "But I didn't." "Why not?" Mary's answer was simple. "Because I need to be able to look at my reflection in shop windows. And I can't do that if I'm a thief." The gentleman studied her for a long moment. "What's your name, child?" "Mary Thompson, sir." "And what do you do, Mary Thompson?" "I sell matches, sir. Would you like to buy one?" Something in the absurdity of the moment. This starving child trying to sell him a match after returning a purse worth 50 times more made him laugh. Not mockery, but genuine surprise. "I'll do better than that. I'll buy all your matches. How many do you have?" "3, sir." "3." He pulled out a shilling and pressed it into her hand. "For 3 matches and a lesson in integrity I apparently needed. Now get yourself somewhere warm." That shilling bought Mary bread and a night in a lodging house. But more importantly, it bought her an idea. The gentleman had been surprised by her honesty. Surprised meant rare. Rare meant valuable. In a city where everyone cheated everyone else, where the poor stole from the rich and the rich exploited the poor, honesty itself was a commodity. The next morning, Mary spent half her remaining money on a small slate and chalk. She wrote in careful letters learned from watching shop signs. Honest Mary, honest errands, honest prices. She set up in Covent Garden Market, offering to run errands for shopkeepers and merchants. The market was already full of errand runners, quick-fingered boys who'd steal more than they deliver, unreliable girls who'd disappear with your money. But Mary had something different. She returned every penny of change. She delivered every message exactly as spoken. She never lied about where she'd been or what had delayed her. Within a week, shopkeepers were requesting her specifically. Within a month, she was earning enough to eat daily and rent a corner of a room. Within 3 months, she'd saved enough to buy a proper dress and a pair of second-hand boots. But Mary's real genius wasn't just honesty. It was observation. Running errands through London's commercial districts, she saw patterns others missed. She noticed which shops had lines and which sat empty. She saw which goods sold quickly and which gathered dust. She watched merchants haggle and learned the mathematics of margin and markup. She particularly noticed the flower sellers near Covent Garden. They bought flowers cheap at dawn from market gardens outside London and sold them dear to wealthy ladies throughout the day. But they were disorganized, competing against each other, driving prices down. And they had no system. Flowers wilted, went unsold, represented pure loss. At 13 years old, Mary made her move. She approached 6 flower sellers with a proposition. Let her coordinate their purchasing and pricing. She'd wake at dawn, go to the market gardens herself, negotiate bulk prices, and divide flowers among them based on their best-selling varieties. In exchange, they'd pay her a percentage of their increased profits. They laughed at first. A 13-year-old girl managing their business? Absurd. But Mary had built a reputation. Honest Mary. And one seller, an older woman named Beth, who'd known hardship herself, agreed to try it for a week. That week, Beth's profits increased by 40%. The other sellers noticed. Within a month, all 6 had agreed to Mary's system. Within 6 months, Mary was coordinating 20 flower sellers and earning more than many adult merchants. But flowers were just the beginning. Mary saw the same inefficiency everywhere. Small vendors competing when they should cooperate. Buying retail when they could buy wholesale. Selling randomly when they could sell strategically. She began expanding her coordination service to other goods. Fruits, vegetables, newspapers. Anything where multiple small sellers served the same market. By 16, Mary Thompson employed 12 people and coordinated over 100 vendors across 3 London markets. By 18, she'd saved enough to rent a small warehouse and started buying goods wholesale herself, selling to her network of vendors at prices lower than they'd get elsewhere, but higher than she'd paid, keeping the margin. She called it cooperative commerce, though that term wouldn't become common for another century. The principle was simple. Small vendors had little bargaining power individually, but collectively they could demand wholesale prices. Mary positioned herself as the coordinator. the guarantor of quality and honesty. The one person everyone trusted not to cheat them. By 21, in 1854, Mary owned 3 warehouses and a fleet of delivery carts. Her cooperative network included over 500 vendors across London. Her annual profit exceeded £2,000, wealth that would have seemed impossible to the 9-year-old freezing in a doorway with 3 matches. But wealth hadn't changed Mary's essential character. She remembered the cold, the hunger, the desperation. When young vendors came to her asking for help starting out, she offered them the same chance she'd been given. Start with honesty. Prove yourself reliable, and she'd extend credit for inventory. Many of those vendors she'd helped eventually became successful merchants themselves. They remembered Mary Thompson had trusted them when no one else would. That trust created loyalty worth more than any contract. In 1860, Mary married Jonathan Wright, a schoolmaster who'd been fascinated by this woman who'd built a commercial empire without being able to read properly until age 15. She taught herself to read using contracts and invoices, driven by necessity rather than education. Together, they established the Thompson Wright School for Street Children, offering free education, 1 meal daily, and most importantly, connections to honest employment. Mary knew that intelligence and determination existed in abundance among the poor. What was missing was opportunity and trust. When Queen Victoria's administrators studied Britain's commercial development in the 1860s, they cited Mary Thompson's cooperative networks as an example of innovative business organization. But Mary herself remained practical, unsentimental about her success. "I didn't invent anything," she told a journalist in 1865. "I just noticed that honest dealing in a dishonest world was itself valuable. And I built on that. The matches I used to sell gave light for a moment. The system I built gives opportunity that lasts." By 1870, at 37 years old, Mary Thompson Wright was one of London's most successful merchants, worth over £20,000. The matchstick girl who'd nearly frozen to death in a doorway now employed hundreds and had helped thousands more establish themselves in honest trade. But she never forgot that moment in 1842, standing in the snow with 3 matches and a choice. She'd chosen honesty when theft would have been easier, survival more certain. That choice, made by a desperate 9-year-old, had revealed something profound. In a world of scarcity and competition, trust itself becomes the scarcest commodity, and therefore the most valuable. Mary Thompson's story proves that wealth isn't built on luck or lineage, but on principles consistently applied, even when they cost you everything. Especially when they cost you everything. Because that's when principles matter most, when keeping them means hunger and breaking them means survival. She chose to keep them. And in that choice, discovered that honor, applied intelligently, was the most profitable business strategy of all. The matches she'd sold for halfpennies had lit fires that died in minutes. But the integrity she demonstrated that frozen night had sparked something that burned far longer. A reputation built over decades, trust earned through thousands of honest transactions, and a legacy that proved the poor need not stay poor if they can be trusted. Mary Thompson died in 1889, wealthy and respected. But her real fortune wasn't counted in pounds. It was measured in the hundreds of vendors she'd helped, the thousands of children her school had educated, and the simple but revolutionary idea she'd proven true: that honesty in a dishonest world is not just virtue, it's valuable. The Matchstick Girl had shown London something it had forgotten: that the poor possess one thing the rich can never buy at any price: the choice to remain honest when dishonesty would save them. And that choice, made bravely at 9 years old in a doorway in winter, can light a fire that burns for lifetimes. Not bad for 3 matches and a frozen child's defiant honor.